Please answer, Ethan. This could be your child's final moment. Her voice tightened, trembling, weighted with despair and fear. Ethan Rourke, the most ruthless kingpin in Chicago's underworld, stared at the phone vibrating relentlessly in his hand. A name pulsed on the screen like a scar that had never healed inside him. Sophia. He hesitated. Just a single moment of delay. A call left unanswered. One heartbeat later, his entire world would shatter. Betrayal, blood, and a secret capable of destroying an entire family he never knew he had. If you were him, and the call you ignored was your child's last goodbye, what would you do? Welcome back to Heartwoven Tales. I'm Selena, and I hope your day has been gentle. Before we step into the story, where are you listening from? Share your city or your country in the comments below. I would truly love to know. Stay until the end, because today's story is filled with twists, intensity, and emotions you absolutely do not want to miss. And if you love tales that touch the heart, don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss another story. Now let's begin. Nighttime Chicago looked as if it had been draped in a heavy velvet shroud, darkened by low clouds and the metallic scent that lingers in the air before a storm. On the top floor of a glass tower tucked away in the West Loop, a muted glow spilled from a private office as if guarding a truth that refused to be uncovered. Ethan Rourke stood silently behind a desk carved from black walnut, a glass of rare Scottish whiskey in his hand, the ice half melted. His gray eyes cold as northern frost drifted across the encrypted report glowing on the screen. Numbers, maps, names, a quiet pulse of a blood-stained empire he had built with unyielding precision. No one called Ethan Rourke unless it was life or death. He had no family, no ties, no Sophia. At least that was what he believed. The vibration of the phone cut through the stillness like a blade. He did not look immediately. Ethan Rourke did not respond to instinct. He moved only when necessary, never from emotion. But the ringing continued, persistent, heavy, almost pleading. Finally, he glanced down. Sophia Lane. Her name glowed against the cold white light of the screen, like a ghost rising from the past. It had been 6 years since he last heard her voice, since he walked out of her life, as a way to free her, or perhaps to escape. Back then, she never knew who he truly was, never knew how deeply violence and vengeance carved through his world. He left to give her peace, or so he convinced himself. But now, why was she calling? Why now? Why did it feel as though every cell in his body was sounding an alarm, a fatal instinct whispering from within? The phone vibrated once more, then stopped. Ethan tightened his grip around the glass. His hand trembled slightly, a rare crack in the armor of a man who controlled everything around him. He did not answer. He chose silence. And that was the first moment of the night he would spend the rest of his life paying for. Thank you for staying with me through today's story. If you are still listening at this moment, it means you are like me. Someone who cherishes stories that reach deeply into emotion and into the quiet corners of the soul. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video with friends or loved ones. Anyone you believe might also need a story to listen to connect with, and perhaps to heal from. I truly want to know, where are you listening from today? Please leave a comment with the name of your city, your state, or your country below. Every time I read your comments, I feel that this storytelling journey is no longer a solitary path, but something that is slowly weaving itself into many hearts around the world. And if you are ready, I'll see you in the next part of this story, where secrets begin to unfold and tears may fall at any moment. Ethan remained standing there unmoving in a room swallowed by shadows and silence touched only by the sound of rain beginning to tap against the wide glass panels behind him. The whiskey in his hand was still full, though the ice had long melted without him noticing. He stared at the phone screen that had gone dark, empty now, reflecting only the cold, expressionless shape of his own face. A vague unease crept through his body, the way a slow, poisonous mist might cling to the lungs and heart. Yet Ethan did not move. Outside, thunder rolled in the distance. Inside him, old memories roared just as violently. Sophia. She had once been the only person capable of shaking the walls he built around himself. A young woman living in Oak Park, far from the underworld he belonged to. She loved him before she knew who he truly was. And he left her the moment he realized that loving her meant placing her in danger. He offered no explanation, leaving behind nothing but an absence he had never dared to face. She never called after he disappeared. No messages, no anger, no goodbye. And yet tonight, her name had flashed on his screen for the first time in 6 years. Ethan swallowed hard, feeling a thorn lodged in his throat. He wondered where she was, if she was safe, if she was in pain, and why her voice echoed so clearly inside his mind. Please answer, Ethan. This might be your child's last moment. He closed his eyes and exhaled through his nose, trying to extinguish the invisible panic tightening inside his chest. His child? No, that was impossible. She never said a word, or at least he had never heard her say it. Had she, after all these years, borne a child? His child? Ethan shook his head as if rejecting the very emotions rising within him. No, he could not think that way. He had no right. He was the man who abandoned her, vanished without explanation, leaving her to face the world on her own. How could he allow himself the comfort of concern? But logic could not overpower instinct. Questions flooded his mind like a river breaking through a shattered dam. What if the child was truly his? What if something terrible was happening? And what if this truly was the last time? He turned toward his desk and set down the glass. His palm was damp, though he did not know whether from sweat or from guilt leaking through him like a colorless toxin. He looked at the phone again. The screen remained black. No more calls. The silence now felt more terrifying than the gunfire he had heard during the bloodiest operations of his life. Once again, he saw her name carved in his thoughts, like a burned mark on his heart. Sophia. A gentle name, once the only refuge for whatever fragments of him still resembled a human being. He lifted his hand to call her back, then stopped. His fingers trembled, not out of fear, but because he did not know what he would hear on the other end. Would it be crying, screaming news of death, hatred, or nothing at all? He hesitated, and in that hesitation he realized it was killing him second by second. Ethan was a wolf, always decisive, always striking before his enemies, always one step ahead. But this time, emotion had turned him motionless, and that frightened him more than any bullet that had ever grazed his skull. The phone stayed silent. She did not call again. Perhaps it was already too late. Perhaps he had missed the one thing that mattered most in his entire life. And he knew that if this silence stretched on for even another minute, he would never forgive himself. Yet somewhere else, miles away from him, the worst was truly beginning. And it was not waiting for anyone, not even a cold-blooded kingpin like Ethan Rourke. At the same moment, more than 20 miles west of Ethan's office, inside a cramped emergency room of the regional hospital in Oak Park, Sophia Lane was kneeling over the edge of a hospital bed, her hands wrapped around the small, cold fingers of Leo. Her face had gone pale, her hair damp with sweat and clinging to her forehead. She could feel nothing except the frantic pounding of her own heartbeat and the irregular beeping of the monitor flickering beside her. The child lay still, breathing weakly, lips tinged with blue. Only a short while earlier he had tried to smile at her, asking in a faint whisper, "Mom, who is my father?" She had not answered. She had never dared to answer. Because the truth was too cruel, too dangerous, too far from the safety she fought to give him. Sophia had lived 6 years in silence, raising her son alone, hiding the identity of his father as a way of protecting both of them. She once believed Ethan should never know Leo existed because his world had no place for a child, and even less for a mother who had no armor. But fate rarely honors the lives we try to build. 3 days earlier, Leo developed a fever, a high unexplained fever that no medication could bring down. Then he vomited, then he seized. Doctors shook their heads, his blood work chaotic signs of poisoning from an unknown source. They rushed him into the emergency room. In her panic, Sophia called Ethan. 6 years without a single word yet, she had never deleted that number. She had prayed for a miracle. She wanted Ethan to know he had a child. She did not need him to take responsibility. She only wanted, if this was the final moment for Leo to be known by his father, for a small piece of truth to be acknowledged, for a fragment of the boy's heart to be connected to the blood from which it came, even if only for an instant. But Ethan had not answered. The call ended after several long rings and fell into a dry, merciless silence. Sophia felt as if the air had been drained from her chest. She wanted to scream to call again, but the doctor stepped in and handed her forms. They needed to run urgent tests, possibly insert a breathing tube if his condition worsened. Her hand trembled as she signed her name. Her name, not his, not the name Rourke. Leo did not carry his father's name. Sophia had never allowed it. She sat back down and pulled out her phone, staring at the screen. No messages, no missed calls. Ethan still had not called back. A part of her was angry, but the larger part felt a dull, corrosive ache spreading through her like leaking acid. She knew who he was. She knew he was not a man moved easily, not someone who reacted out of softness, but she had hoped. Just once he would hear her voice and understand that a child's life hung on the edge of his decision. Sophia set the phone aside and lowered her head to kiss her son's forehead. His skin was burning, his breathing growing fainter by the minute. Outside the door, doctors and nurses argued over the latest panel of test results. She caught fragments like toxin, possible poisoning, unknown source. Sophia's heart constricted. Someone had done this. Why and why now, when she had no choice but to break her silence, did Ethan refuse to listen? A machine let out a sudden warning tone, sharp and broken. Leo's pulse slipped by a single unit. Sophia shot to her feet and grabbed the doctor's arm, her eyes pleading. "Please, save my child. Whatever it takes. I will do anything." The doctor looked at her exhausted, unable to offer reassurance. In Sophia's mind, one sentence echoed endlessly, pounding with every beat of her heart. "Please answer, Ethan. If there is still any humanity left in you, call back, before it is too late." The rain outside was falling harder now, each drop striking the emergency room window like a sharp, cold knock. Sophia stood pressed against the corner wall, her arms wrapped tightly around herself, as if she were trying to hold on to the last bit of warmth. Behind a cloudy white plastic curtain, Leo lay motionless, surrounded by machines' four lines and the unforgiving glow of surgical lights. A group of doctors stepped out, their expressions tense, and none of them could meet her eyes. Sophia moved toward them, her legs numb, her hand brushing the sleeve of a young nurse as she spoke in a hoarse whisper. "Please, my son. How is he?" The nurse hesitated, her gaze drifting away as if searching for the least painful words. "He is very weak. His immune system is reacting abnormally to an unidentified substance. It could be a toxin, but we have not found the source. We need more time for additional testing." Sophia froze. A toxin. She repeated the word silently, trying to fit it into a puzzle already tangled beyond recognition. Leo had been poisoned. This was not an illness, it was an act, intentional. She turned to look at him through the glass, his small chest rising and falling with effort, struggling for every breath. That tiny face had once lit up every time he smiled, every time he asked, "Mom, can I have ice cream tomorrow?" Now it was pale and fading, as if life were slowly slipping out of him. A cold shiver crawled down her spine. No one knew who Leo's father was. She had kept that secret for 6 long years. There was no document with Ethan Rourke's name. She had never told her friends, never told family, not even the doctors. But that did not mean that someone else did not know. Deep down, Sophia had always felt that one day the past she fought so hard to bury would find its way back. But not like this. Not through the fragile body of her child. And not in a cold room that felt like a chamber awaiting its final verdict. She pulled out her phone again. Still nothing. No reply, no message, no missed call. Ethan remained silent. She bit her lip, forcing back the tears, then turned away. She could not wait any longer. If the hospital could not determine the source of the toxin, she would have to do it herself. Sophia strode to the nurse's station and demanded to speak directly with the attending physician. She wanted the detailed lab results, a list of every single thing Leo had eaten, drunk, or touched during the past week. Her voice was firm, her gaze so unwavering that the staff looked at one another in confusion and unease. When they refused, she did not step back. She stood there repeating her questions, refusing to move until the senior physician reluctantly came out to speak with her. Sophia pulled him into a corner of the hallway and showed him a photo of a bottle of orange juice Leo had drunk that morning, a bottle that had been sitting in the refrigerator overnight. She had not thought anything of it at first, but now everything looked different. She asked him if someone could have slipped something into it, if that could have been the source of the toxin. The doctor looked at her, skepticism slowly shifting into concern. He said he would request additional testing from the lab. Sophia nodded, clutching her phone so tightly her knuckles turned white. It was all she could do, but inside her suspicion was becoming painfully clear. This was no accident, and the only person who could truly help her uncover who was behind this was Ethan. She looked at her phone again, her eyes no longer carrying hope, but something closer to a warning. If you do not call back, I will come find you. And this time, I will not come only with the truth. I will come with the fury of a mother who has stayed silent for far too long. The phone rang at 3:12 in the morning. It was not an alarm. It was not an internal call. It was an unfamiliar number glowing across the dark screen of the phone, resting on the black walnut desk, where Ethan Rourke still sat alone, the dim light casting a stone-cold sheen over his face. He had not left the room since Sophia's call, had not eaten, had not drunk a sip of water, only sat in silence, as if time itself had frozen around him. When the phone rang, Ethan merely glanced at it. A part of him wanted to ignore it the way he ignored so many things. But a deeper part of him, nameless and beyond reason, urged him to answer. He lifted the phone to his ear without speaking. On the other end was a woman's voice, professional, yet uneasily uncertain. Hello, I am a nurse from the pediatric department at Oak Park Regional Hospital. I am calling on behalf of Ms. Sophia Lane. Ethan tightened his grip on the phone. His heartbeat thundered through his chest like war drums. His reply came low and rough. What happened? The nurse hesitated before continuing. Ms. Lane asked us to contact you. Her son Leo Lane is in critical condition. He has been poisoned, source unknown. Ethan stopped breathing. The entire world blurred around him. The child's name cut through him like a blade carving open an old wound. Leo. A short, gentle name that struck like a shockwave. Her son. Sophia's son. His son. The nurse continued, unaware that the man on the other end had just felt something inside him rupture. The boy's condition is deteriorating rapidly. Ms. Lane said you are the only legal guardian if anything happens. She asked that we call you. That sentence made Ethan shoot to his feet, the chair scraping violently against the wall. He strode toward the window, staring down at the city drowning beneath heavy sheets of rain, gripping the phone harder. I am coming. Tell her I am on my way. When he ended the call, Ethan stood still for several seconds, as if everything had collapsed, yet was somehow beginning at the same time. He had no time for shock, for anger, for regret. Not anymore. He grabbed his coat and walked out of the office, taking nothing with him except his phone and the silver ring that once belonged to his father, the last remnant of a family that had shattered long ago. Driving through the city, Ethan could not remember how many red lights he blew past or how many streets he left behind. His black Bentley cut through the night like an arrow. In his mind, all he could see was Sophia, the days she sat in the park reading the sound of her laughter the first time she watched snow fall that year. He remembered the strict order he had given to his entire network the day he left. Sophia Lane is a ghost. No surveillance, no updates, total separation. He had blinded himself on purpose, believing that total ignorance was the only way to ensure his enemies never traced her through him. But now he understood that silence had been a fatal error. And now there was another face. A boy he had never known existed. Leo. How could he not have known? How could he have been blind to the one thing that should have mattered above all else these past 6 years? And why had he not answered the call? When he arrived, the hospital gate had already been opened. A security guard recognized his car and simply nodded. Ethan rushed into the main lobby, where the harsh white light against the cold tile made everything feel even more unsettling. The reception desk guided him to the pediatric wing. A young nurse hurried toward him and pointed down a long hallway. "Miss Sophia is in room 32. Ethan did not speak. He simply nodded and walked his footsteps, weighted with the gravity of his past and the guilt pressing on his shoulders. When he reached the door, it was slightly ajar. Inside, the steady beeping of machines filled the air. He pushed the door open. Sophia stood beside the bed, her back to him. On the bed lay a small, fragile child, thin, pale eyes closed. He did not need to ask. He did not need anyone to confirm it. Ethan's heart knew instantly that the child was his son. And in that moment, everything, every shield he had ever built, every illusion of strength he ever believed in, collapsed entirely. The rain had not stopped when Ethan stepped out of the hospital room, his face pale, but his eyes burning with fire. He had stood beside Leo's bed for nearly an hour, watching the unconscious child lying there with ashen, skin-dry lips and hands as cold as ice. Sophia had not cried. She simply sat there holding her son's hand, her gaze empty yet strangely unbreakable. When Ethan touched her shoulder lightly to tell her he would step out for a moment, she did not turn, only nodded faintly. There was nothing left to say. Everything was clear. That child was his, and someone had tried to kill him. Ethan strode through the hospital corridor with his phone pressed to his ear. On the other end was Jonah Park, his most loyal lieutenant, the man he trusted to manage the vast underworld network stretching from the docks to the southern gambling rings of Chicago. When Jonah answered, Ethan's voice came low and thunderous. "Get me the security footage around Sophia's place from the past 3 days. Check every person who approached the apartment, especially delivery workers, maintenance staff, paramedics, anyone unfamiliar," Jonah asked. "Did something happen, boss?" Ethan replied sharply. "They went after my son. Find them." Jonah fell silent for a few seconds before murmuring, "Understood." Ethan ended the call, opened his car door, and slid behind the wheel. The black Bentley roared to life and shot out of the lot. Rain hammered against the windshield as if the sky itself had turned violent, but the storm inside Ethan was far worse. He did not know who had done this, but he knew one truth. This was no accident, not coincidence. This was a message, a direct strike, and it was a fatal mistake, because no one touched the blood of Ethan Rourke without paying a price. Merging onto the highway, Ethan's hands tightened around the steering wheel. His mind raced through old enemies, crews he had dismantled, men who once swore revenge. But then, one name cut through the chaos with razor clarity. Marcus Delane. A former partner, once his right hand, who betrayed him 4 years earlier before vanishing without a trace. Ethan had spared Marcus then because of Sophia. Because at the time she had been pregnant, though Ethan had never known. But Marcus had known. He always knew. And if there was anyone cruel enough to poison a child and smart enough to do it without leaving a trail, it was Marcus. Ethan activated the Bluetooth and ordered "Call Cassie Central Surveillance Unit." When Cassie picked up, he gave rapid instructions. Track any activity connected to Marcus Delane in the past 24 hours, especially movement in shadow accounts or money funneled into shell companies. If he is in Chicago, I want every step he has taken. The woman replied quickly. Understood. I will start immediately. Ethan ended the call, switched lanes, and headed toward the old warehouse district near the river, the place where he and Marcus once met countless times as allies. Inside him churned a storm of fury and fear. He had once believed he had nothing left to lose, that walking away from Sophia was a form of mercy for both of them. But now he understood he had abandoned the most important part of himself, a family, a son, and the only woman who had ever taught him what it meant to love. The rain grew heavier, lashing the windshield as though trying to hold him back. But Ethan did not slow. This time he was not running from his past. He was hunting it. And he swore to himself that whoever had put Leo in that hospital bed would pay. Not only in blood, but with everything they had ever loved. The black Bentley made a sharp turn at the corner of 35th Street, its tires screeching across the wet pavement, reflecting the flickering red glow of storefront signs lining both sides of the road. Ethan had found no trace of Marcus at the abandoned warehouse district, as he had hoped, nor had the surveillance teams uncovered any hint that Marcus had left the city. The deeper Ethan pushed into the underworld's channels, the more he sensed something was wrong. Every trail was too clean, as if someone had cleared the path in advance. Marcus was not hiding, he was waiting. And meanwhile, Leo was suspended between life and death. Ethan's hands tightened around the steering wheel until his knuckles turned bone white. Every passing minute felt like another blade driven into his heart, every street flashing past his window, a reminder that he had arrived far too late to protect the one thing that mattered most. When the hospital gates of Oak Park appeared ahead, the clock on the dashboard showed 4:17 in the morning. The rain had lightened to a mist, but the air was still thick with cold tension. Ethan cut the engine and stepped out. His suit still carrying the faint scent of gunpowder from another life, now blurred by the rain. He moved through the main hallway, each step echoing sharply in the quiet. A hospital at night was never noisy. It felt like a place suspended between life and death, where every emotion was compressed into the tight breath of someone waiting for news that could break them. Ethan headed straight for the reception desk, where a nurse from the previous shift immediately stood upon seeing him, recognizing the look in his eyes. She spoke softly, almost in a whisper, out of respect for the severity lingering in the emergency ward. Leo is still under critical observation. The doctor is waiting for you. Please come with me. Ethan nodded and followed her through a long, narrow corridor that seemed to stretch on endlessly, the fluorescent lights above flickering rhythmically in a way that made one want to shout just to break the suffocating stillness. When they reached the attending physician's room, the door swung open and Sophia was already inside. She wore a thin, hospital-issued coat, her hair tied back hastily, her face pale, but her eyes unwavering, fierce, with the defiance of a mother holding on to her child one fragile second at a time. No tears, no trembling, only resolve. Their eyes met, and for a moment time slowed. No words were needed, no explanations. They understood each other through the shared pain that weighed on both of them. Ethan stepped closer, his voice hoarse, strained with cold and fury. "Any news?" Sophia handed him a newly printed lab report, the ink still fresh. Ethan scanned it quickly. A single chemical compound appeared 3 times, an extremely rare substance nearly extinct on the market. Ethan knew exactly what it was. A toxin Marcus had used in an internal purge years before, detectable only through a triple-layer deep analysis. Only Marcus. And this was his message. Sophia whispered, barely able to remain standing. "I tried to keep Leo away from everything. I did everything I could." Ethan looked at her, and for the first time in 6 years, he had no words. No apology could reach far enough. No reason could erase the agony in her eyes. He simply reached out and took her hand, gripping it gently. "We will not let our son die. I promise." She did not speak, but for the first time she did not pull her hand away. And in that moment, a nurse rushed toward them breathless. "The doctor needs both of you in the emergency room now. Leo's condition is worsening." Ethan released her hand, his eyes darkening. He turned and strode swiftly toward the familiar room where a small heart was fighting for every second of life. And this time he would not walk away again. The emergency room doors burst open, the sharp white light slicing into the hallway like a gleaming blade. Ethan and Sophia rushed inside, their hearts threatening to split apart as they saw doctors and nurses crowded around the small bed in the center of the room. The monitors beeping filled the air, each uneven, piercing sound, announcing how thin Leo's life had been stretched, trembling like a frayed thread. On the bed, the child's tiny body seemed nearly swallowed by a maze of wires, of vor lines, and medical equipment. His face was ghostly pale, his lips bluish, his eyelids barely closed, as if he were slipping into a dream with no path back. One doctor checked his pupils and shook his head gently to a nearby nurse, while another pushed medication into the IV line. Sophia rushed to the bedside and clasped her son's hand, tears rising, but somehow held back. "My boy, I am right here. I am not going anywhere. Please open your eyes." Ethan stood at the foot of the bed, staring at the child he had never held, had never heard call him father, now fighting for his life. A crushing weight settled over his chest. He had watched countless men fall, had given orders that ended lives, but never, not once, had he felt this helpless. No one in the room spoke aloud, but the urgency and growing despair poured into the air like rising floodwater. Suddenly the heart monitor let out a string of erratic tones, the waves on the screen thrashing violently. A doctor shouted for a cardiac stimulant, and a nurse scrambled to prepare the syringe, while Sophia clung to Leo's hand, whispering prayers she did not have the strength to form fully. Ethan stepped forward, standing on the opposite side of the bed, his eyes locked on that small, motionless face. In that instant, memories of his own childhood stormed back. The father murdered before his eyes, the mother who vanished without farewell, a boyhood shattered by violence and shadows. He had sworn never to have children, never to let another innocent life grow up in a world like his. Yet fate had brought Leo to him, only to try to take him away. Ethan leaned down and whispered softly into his son's ear, his voice breaking despite every effort to stay composed. "Leo, it is your father. I am sorry I was not there sooner, but I am here now, do you hear me? You are strong like your mother, so you cannot give up. You have to come back, do you understand?" For a moment, he thought he felt Leo's fingers twitch, but no one could tell whether it was real or just a desperate illusion. The lead physician turned to Sophia, his tone heavy. "We are doing everything we can. But if he does not stabilize within the next 15 minutes, we will need to prepare for advanced resuscitation. The risk of neurological damage will be extremely high." Sophia nodded, too drained to protest, her hand gripping her son's, as though loosening her hold would let his life slip away. Ethan straightened, something shifting in his expression, the anguish hardening into resolve. He pulled out his phone and dialed a secure number. When the call connected, his voice was cold metal. "Jonah, I need Leo's blood samples sent to a private lab immediately. Not through the hospital. I do not trust them. Use the underground network if you have to. I want to know exactly what is killing my son." Jonah did not ask questions. He only said yes. Ethan ended the call and turned back to Leo. The boy's face remained still, but something inside Ethan flickered with the smallest spark of hope. He had never believed in fate. He had never believed in miracles. But this time he prayed that a miracle was real, and he would fight for it with everything left inside, a man who had long been told he did not possess a heart. Ethan stood motionless beside the hospital bed, his eyes fixed on the small face, sinking into a painful, heavy sleep. Every fragile breath Leo struggled to take tightened Ethan's chest as though an unseen hand were crushing his ribs. No one in that room knew that the cold, unshakable man who once haunted the darkest corners of Chicago's underworld was now battling a shock greater than any bloodshed he had ever survived. He could not stop looking at his son. Every tiny detail of that face, the long lashes, the delicate bridge of his nose, the wide, innocent forehead, twisted something deep in Ethan's heart. Not because of their resemblance, but because of the fierce, unfamiliar ache rising inside him, an emotion he had never allowed himself to feel before love. A love without a name, without preparation, without reason. A truth as undeniable as the blood flowing in their veins. Sophia sat on the opposite side of the bed, exhausted, yet unable to look away from her child. She was silent too, but the air between them was no longer filled with distance. Instead, it carried a quiet companionship between two people once separated by fear, now bound together by the little life lying between life and death. Ethan leaned forward and gently placed his hand on Leo's forehead, his fingers trembling as if even the softest touch might shatter the fragile boy beneath them. A sudden wave of memories surged through his mind, images he had never lived a child in a stroller. Sophia smiling as she fed him his first spoonful of porridge, moments he was never there to see, never allowed to be part of. The sense of something sacred stolen from him made his throat tighten painfully. Sophia's voice came softly hoarse from hours without rest. I did not know what else to do, Ethan. When you left, I wanted to call, I wanted to find you. But I did not know if bringing this child into your world was the right thing. I was afraid. Ethan did not blame her. How could he? He was the one who cut off every connection, the one who disappeared without a word, the man who believed leaving her behind was the best way to protect her. But it had been the greatest mistake of his life. He sat down, his eyes never leaving Leo. His voice came low and dry. I never thought I would have a child. I never imagined a day like this. A child who was a stranger and yet made of my own blood. A child who never called me father, and who might never have the chance. Sophia held Leo's hand tighter, her voice barely a whisper. He asked me who his father was. I did not know how to answer. I did not want to build a beautiful picture only for him to learn a different truth later. But I also did not want him to grow up feeling abandoned. I was not brave enough to tell him the truth, and I was not strong enough to face you. A surge rose inside Ethan's chest. Not anger, but sorrow, regret, the helplessness of a father who could not rewind time. He clenched his fist, his voice sinking, but hardening like tempered steel. From this moment on, I will not leave him again, no matter what it takes, no matter who I have to face. Leo is my son, and I swear I will protect him with everything I have, even if it means returning to the life I tried to escape. Sophia did not answer, but when she looked at him, her eyes carried no blame for the first time in years. And in that same moment, the heart monitor emitted a sound that was different, clearer, stronger. Both Ethan and Sophia turned toward it. On the screen, Leo's heartbeat had risen by a single unit. Not much, but it was the first sign. And it was enough to make a father who had never known he had a child let silent tears fall for the very first time. The steady rhythm of the heart monitor echoed through the stillness of the intensive care unit, each faint beat like a fragile drum holding on to the last strand of life. Ethan sat beside the bed, his large hand wrapped around Leo's small ice-cold fingers. Sophia stood on the opposite side, her eyes never leaving her son's pale face. In that moment, they were no longer two people wounded by the past, no longer the broken remnants of a love long buried. They were a mother and a father, and between them lay everything. A long, piercing beep shattered the silence, tightening Sophia's chest like a fist. Ethan snapped his head up. On the monitor, the wavering heartbeat suddenly flattened into a single unbroken line. No more intermittent beeps, only one long, haunting tone. The death line. Sophia screamed, "No, no, please, doctor." Her voice cracked, as if her throat had been crushed, her legs giving out as she collapsed against the edge of the bed. Ethan shot to his feet, eyes wide, unable to believe what he was seeing. A nurse slammed her palm onto the emergency button. The door burst open moments later, a medical team rushing in with a crash cart, syringes, and a defibrillator. Sophia was gently pulled aside while Ethan stood frozen, unable to move, his gaze locked on the still, tiny body of his son. His mind went blank. His limbs turned numb. A part of him died the moment that straight line appeared. A doctor shouted, "Stand by. 1, 2, 3. The first jolt made Leo's small body lift off the bed, then fall limp again. No response. The second shock. Still nothing. Ethan stumbled back a step as if struck by an invisible blow. He could not breathe. Sophia lay curled on the floor, her hands covering her face, her shoulders shaking violently. Ethan looked at everything through a haze, as though watching from behind frosted glass. He could no longer hear the doctors, clearly could no longer smell the sterile bite of antiseptic, could no longer feel the cold fluorescent lights overhead. He saw only his son lying there unmoving, while electric shocks fought desperately to pull him back from the edge of nothingness. The third shock hit. A moment stretched as long as eternity passed. And then on the monitor, a flicker of movement. A single spike of rhythm. A beep returned. Soft. Thin. But real. A doctor shouted, "We have a response. Continue monitoring." The heart rate began to rise again. Slow, frail, but alive. The room seemed to breathe again. Ethan stood unmoving, tears slipping down his face without his noticing. Sophia pushed herself up from the floor, her trembling hand reaching blindly for the bed's edge. They did not speak. They did not embrace. They did not collapse in sobs. They simply stood there watching the child who had just crossed a threshold from which many never return. Ethan did not know if Leo would wake. No one could say whether the boy would carry permanent scars. But he was still here. He still had a chance. He still had hope. And that alone pulled Ethan back from the abyss. He knew he had arrived too late. But he also knew that from this moment forward, he would never allow anything to harm this child again. Not an enemy. Not the shadows. Not a single mistake he had ever made. Because the father within him had awakened. And he would never return to the man he once was. Dawn had begun to break when Ethan stepped out of the hospital room, his face hollow, his shoulders sagging as if an invisible weight had been pressing on him through the entire night. Leo was still alive, still breathing, though only barely, but in Sophia's vacant, exhausted eyes, and in the taut, brittle silence of the doctors, Ethan understood that survival was only a temporary victory. The real battle had not yet begun. Out in the hallway, Jonah was already waiting, his coat drenched with rain, his eyes shadowed with tension. Without greetings, without preamble, Jonah handed Ethan a small metal box. Inside was a glass vial containing a pale amber liquid. It had come from the private laboratory Ethan trusted above all others, delivered overnight through a discreet network. Ethan opened it, staring at the vial as if looking long enough would reveal the entire truth lurking inside. The toxin had been identified as an extremely rare variant of atropine fused with an extract from water hemlock, a compound used in ancient European assassinations. It carried no scent, no taste, dissolved seamlessly in liquids, and left nearly no trace unless examined through a triple-layer analysis. Ethan narrowed his eyes, his voice dropping into a grim murmur. Only one man is reckless enough and intelligent enough to recreate this. Marcus Delane. Jonah nodded. And there is something else. The lab detected traces of a rare enzyme found only in a type of reagent your old organization used for internal purge missions. It cannot occur naturally, which means this toxin is not just a warning, it is an accusation. Ethan stood still for several seconds before turning to Jonah. Can we trace the original batch? Who made it? Who transported it? Jonah shook his head. Everything went through an intermediary, no names, no locations. But there is something strange. Before this toxin reached whoever ordered it, it was tested at a pharmaceutical lab in New Jersey, owned by Elvin Pharmatech. Ethan's brow tightened. Elvin. The name had never been tied to the underworld, but he knew better than to believe in coincidences. Behind a polished pharmaceutical giant could be anything. And if Marcus had ties to Elvin, this was no longer a personal vendetta. Footsteps echoed softly behind them. Sophia approached, holding a hospital printout in her shaking hands. She said nothing, only handed it to Ethan, her eyes carrying pain and a simmering fury barely held back. Ethan took the page, scanned it, and felt his heart plunge into a silent abyss. In Leo's blood there were traces of an unfamiliar microorganism, something far more insidious than toxin alone. A biomedical test sample never publicly released, an incomplete synthetic virus. Leo had not only been targeted for assassination, he had been used as an experiment. Ethan crushed the paper in his hand, the crumpling sounding like metal grinding against metal. He looked at Sophia, his voice rasped and raw as corroded steel. They did not just want to kill him, they wanted to see how long he could endure. Sophia closed her eyes, tears spilling without a sob. Ethan turned to Jonah, his tone frozen and deadly. "Call the entire old unit. I do not care if we have to tear Chicago apart or burn an entire pharmaceutical empire to the ground. I want Marcus Delane in front of me within 24 hours, alive or dead. And if anyone else is involved, I want every name." Jonah nodded, once pulled out his phone and disappeared into the corridor. Sophia remained beside Ethan without asking anything more. Between them, there were no questions left about the past. Only one undeniable truth: their son had been turned into a pawn in a merciless game, and they would never allow it to happen again, no matter the cost. That afternoon, as weak sunlight filtered through the frosted glass along the hospital corridor, Ethan sat alone in the waiting room outside the intensive care unit. Sophia had fallen asleep beside Leo after nearly 30 hours without leaving her son's side. Ethan could not bring himself to wake her, nor could he walk away. In his hands was a stack of documents Jonah had delivered, printed on thick paper, marked with the red seal of Ethan's private underground network files that would never appear on any legitimate system. A detailed analysis of Elven Pharmatech's financial history, its shareholder registry, and its hidden asset transfers. One familiar name surfaced in the authorization stamp on a transaction linked to the laboratory in New Jersey: Catherine Rourke. Ethan went still. Catherine was his cousin, the girl he had grown up with in an orphanage on the outskirts of Springfield. After he left the orphanage and descended into the underworld, she was the only person he kept in contact with, the only one he trusted enough not to sever completely. Catherine had chosen a different path. She studied biochemistry, became a researcher, always saying she wanted to create something that saved people, not destroyed them as Ethan once did. But why was her name embedded in the systems of a corporation tied to the toxin that nearly killed Leo? Ethan felt his chest tighten painfully. Impossible. Catherine could not have done this. She was the last family he believed he could trust. But he knew better than anyone that the most dangerous enemy was always the one closest to you. He picked up his phone and called Jonah. His voice was glacial. "I need every trace of Catherine's communications for the past 6 months. Emails, phone calls, financial transactions, travel records, even fingerprints if necessary. Leave nothing out." Jonah was silent for several seconds before answering quietly. "Are you sure? She is your family." Ethan closed his eyes, his voice cracking like stones splitting. "Family does not poison children. Check it." He ended the call and stood walking into the hallway. His mind swirled with memories. Catherine calling him Big Brother, the handwritten letters she sent while he hid in a frozen warehouse in Baltimore, the way she had told him during their last meeting by the Hudson River, that even if the world saw him as a monster, he would always be the protector of her childhood. But if she had used that trust to mask her own scheme, forgiveness no longer had a place. That night, Jonah sent an audio file extracted from a coded call made 3 weeks earlier. The woman's voice in the recording did not tremble, did not hide. It was familiar, gentle, slow, yet sharp as ice. "Everything has been tested on subject L54. The child is responding better than projected. If the results hold, we can expand the trial to 20 units." Ethan went still, his eyes fixed on the blank wall. Subject L54. Leo. Catherine had monitored his son as a specimen, had assigned him a code like a piece of laboratory equipment. Not Marcus, not some distant force, but the one person he believed would never betray him. Sophia stepped into the hallway and found Ethan sitting motionless, the phone still in his hand. She meant to ask what had happened, but when she saw his bloodless face, the hollow shock in his eyes, she understood before he spoke. Ethan did not look at her. His voice was low and broken, as though rising from the bottom of an endless pit. My cousin, Catherine, she is behind this. Sophia froze. 1 second, then 2. Her hand pressed over her heart, as if to keep it from breaking. No one said a word, but both of them knew the battle ahead was no longer only about saving Leo's life. It was about exposing the rot festering within their own bloodline. Night settled over Chicago with a thin veil of mist, like the cold breath of a ghost lingering at the edge of the city. Inside the hospital, the corridors gradually emptied, leaving only the steady hum of machines whispering like the passage of time. Ethan sat alone in a small monitoring room beside the emergency ward, a laptop open in front of him displaying streams of decoded data from Elvin Pharmatech's internal system. Jonah sat beside him, his eyes bloodshot from 2 days without sleep, fingers still tapping urgently across the keyboard. A soft beep sounded. Jonah frowned and opened a newly extracted folder. An audio file. No known source, no identifiable IP address, as if it had been sent from nowhere. Jonah looked at Ethan, awaiting a command. Ethan nodded. Play it. The distorted noise that followed was tangled with a woman's voice, low and steady, despite the static unmistakable even through the interference. Catherine. Her words carried no attempt at persuasion or apology. They were a warning, even a challenge. If you are hearing this, it means I am further along than you ever imagined. I do not need your forgiveness. I do not need you to understand. I only need you to know that Leo is the key. Not just for me, for everything this world is about to face. Do not try to save the boy unless you are ready to confront the entire truth. And do not think I do not know you are tracking me. You will not make it in time. The message ended with a soft laugh cold enough to chill bone. Jonah cursed under his breath, his face going pale. Ethan said nothing, but his eyes darkened, sinking deep like a collapsing star. He rose and walked out of the room like a gust of icy wind. Down the hallway, dim golden light stretched toward the far end where Sophia stood with her back against the wall, holding a notebook of Leo's latest vitals, updated by a nurse. When she saw Ethan approaching, she moved as if to step toward him, but the look in his eyes made her stop. No words were needed. She knew something had shifted. Ethan came closer, his voice rough and solid as stone. Catherine sent a message. Not an apology, a threat. She knows we are tracking her. And more importantly, she believes Leo is the key to something far larger than a child's life. Sophia gripped the notebook so tightly her knuckles whitened, fear mingled with rising anger in her eyes. A child fighting to survive, and someone dared to turn him into a pawn in a diseased game. Ethan nodded. It is more than experimentation. It is part of a larger plan. A strategic move. And Catherine is not acting alone. She has a network. She has power. She can manipulate data, erase trails by entire systems. Jonah rushed over, breathless. More data came through. Her system is encrypted with a security tier accessible only to an internal elite group at Elvin. And there's something else. The account sending the audio file is not hers. It originated from a relay server in Hungary. Ethan narrowed his eyes. Hungary was one of the major transit points for the illegal bioweapons market. That meant Catherine was not just a link. She was a coordinator. Or worse, the center of it. Sophia spoke softly as though trying to steady herself. What about Leo? What can we do? Ethan looked at her, his eyes filled with unshakable resolve. We find her entire network. Track it from Elvin to Hungary, to every collaborator. And before Catherine can strike again, we end this. That night, Ethan never left the hospital. He sat beside his son until dawn, his hand wrapped around Leo's small fingers, watching the slight flutter of his eyelids, the faint sign of life returning. He knew the battle ahead would be brutal, but he was no longer the cold, solitary kingpin he once was. He was a father, and a father does not retreat when his child is in danger, not from enemies lurking outside, and not from the shadows within his own blood. The early morning rain tapped sharply against the glass panels of the 13th floor corridor as Ethan walked with heavy yet purposeful steps. In his hand was a blueprint of the hospital's internal hallways and technical sublevels, something Jonah had just hacked from the maintenance server. Catherine had been right in her recording. He would not make it in time. And that meant something had already been set in motion here, not elsewhere. The hospital was no longer safe. Ethan had said nothing to Sophia. He simply told her to stay by Leo's side and not leave the room under any circumstance. She had not asked for an explanation. In his eyes, she finally saw what she had never understood 6 years earlier. When Ethan chose to protect someone, nothing in the world could stop him, not even himself. Jonah waited at the stairwell 1 floor below. They avoided the elevators. If Catherine truly had someone inside, the central control system could be hijacked at any moment. Jonah muttered as he pointed to the tablet showing irregular heat signatures in the southeastern technical wing. That area was supposed to be shut down for repairs 2 days earlier, yet there was movement. Ethan nodded, pulling out the small handgun tucked beneath his coat, the weapon he had not touched since he walked away from his old world. Their footsteps echoed softly through the long, cold corridor, where flickering fluorescent lights pulsed like the heartbeat of something dying. At the door to the technical room, Jonah paused, crouched, and took out a small device. Magnetic lock. I can open it. 20 seconds later, the door clicked open. A wave of damp air mixed with chemical fumes drifted out heavy and suffocating, like the stench of betrayal that had not yet dispersed. Ethan stepped inside, first gun raised. The hallway leading toward the maintenance sector stretched like a dark labyrinth. A few meters ahead, a single bulb flickered, cutting the space into trembling slices of light and shadow. Machinery hummed in the distance, the steady breath of some hidden beast waiting beneath the building. Suddenly, a figure appeared at the far end of the hall. Ethan motioned for Jonah to stay back, then pressed himself against the wall, moving with silent precision. The man did not wear a nurse's coat and carried no hospital badge. In his hand was something resembling a medical cooler, the type used for transporting biological samples or specialized drugs. Ethan approached, his breathing slowing like a predator zeroing in on its prey. When only 10 meters remained between them, the man stopped and turned his head slightly as though he had known Ethan would come. The face was familiar. Trent. One of Marcus Delane's former underlings, a man Ethan remembered sparing during an operation in Seattle. And now he was here carrying something that could be the final threat to Leo. Ethan did not ask questions. He did not issue warnings. He fired. The bullet sliced through the air and struck Trent's left shoulder, sending him crashing to the ground and the cooler skidding across the floor. Jonah rushed forward, seized the cooler, and checked inside. 3 unmarked vials sealed with specialized medical tape. Trent writhed on the ground, blood spreading across the old tiles, yet he was laughing as though victory were already his. Ethan crouched, gripping the man's collar, his voice a low growl. Who else? How many people are inside? Trent gasped, then hissed through clenched teeth. Too late, Ethan. She already has what she needs. And now, all of you are just bait. A small explosion echoed from somewhere deep in the building, the sound carrying through the ducts from the direction of the main corridor where Leo's room was. Ethan and Jonah locked eyes, their hearts stopping for a breath. No words were needed. They turned and ran, sprinting back through the cold white maze of the hospital, racing against time and against a truth rising from the shadows to meet them. The shrill scream of alarms cut through the hospital corridors as Ethan and Jonah sprinted back from the technical wing, each pounding footstep echoing like a violent warning against their ribs. The air was thick with antiseptic, and faint smoke drifting from the small explosion on the 13th floor, mingling with the rising panic of medical staff scattering in every direction. But Ethan did not slow, did not ask, did not glance back. Every step he took was a step closer to the edge of life and death. When they reached the main hallway, Leo's room stood empty. The door was wide open, a long scrape marking the floor and leading toward the emergency stairwell. Sophia was gone. Leo was gone. For a heartbeat, a low, animalistic growl tore through Ethan's chest as though something ancient and feral clawed its way to the surface. Jonah pointed at the hallway camera feed that had just come back online after the earlier blackout. On the screen appeared Catherine dressed in a fake nurse's coat, pushing a gurney with Leo's small body, hidden beneath a thin blanket. Sophia walked beside them with her wrists bound, her mouth sealed with medical tape, her eyes blazing with anguish and defiance. The final destination on the footage was the rooftop access. Ethan did not hesitate. He snatched the gun from Jonah's hand and sprinted toward the service elevator. His mind was a storm. Catherine, his cousin, his blood. The girl who once called him Big Brother with bright admiration was now pushing his child toward the edge of the world with her own hands. When Ethan burst through the rooftop door, cold air slammed into his face like a blow. Wind roared across the wide concrete stretch, sending dust and distant birds spiraling beneath a sky the color of tarnished steel. At the center stood Catherine, the gurney behind her, and 3 armed men forming a protective circle. Sophia was bound tightly, her mouth sealed, her eyes full of fury and despair. Ethan raised his gun. Above them, the heavy rhythmic thrum of an approaching helicopter cut through the wind, descending toward the helipad. Her extraction team. But as Ethan stepped into the light with his weapon raised, the pilot hesitated, saw the trap and banked the aircraft sharply away, abandoning her to the storm. Catherine watched her escape vanish into the clouds, then turned back to Ethan. She spoke, her voice low and steady. "I always knew. You were never going to let that child fall into anyone's hands." Ethan said nothing. He looked at Leo instead. The pale little face, the closed eyelids, the faint breath that seemed ready to dissolve into the wind. Catherine stepped forward, and her eyes no longer held the warmth he remembered, but the conviction of someone who believed entirely in her own righteousness. "I did not kill him. I saved him. No one else saw what I saw in Leo's DNA. He is the first subject to survive the sequence of trials. If we continue, we could cure dozens of hereditary diseases. I am creating the future." Ethan tightened his grip on the gun, his voice a low rasp. "You call this the future after binding a child and pumping poison into his veins. You call this ethics. Did you ever look into his eyes? He is human, not a product." Catherine stood silent for a long breath, wind tugging her hair and revealing beneath her coat the small elven insignia pinned to her scrubs, the final confirmation of her betrayal. "I had no choice. Marcus is dead. Someone had to continue the work, and I cannot let emotion disrupt the outcome." Ethan stepped closer. His gun remained trained on her, but his eyes carried not only rage, but something breaking inside him. Pain, devastation, a sorrow sharp enough to cut bone. His voice lowered. "You always have a choice. You could still choose to stop. But now, it is too late." At that moment, Jonah triggered a signal jammer from his phone, scrambling the earpieces of the armed guards. Ethan seized the opening. He fired, striking the man nearest Sophia, dropping him instantly as she stumbled forward. Ethan rolled left as another guard opened fire. In under 15 seconds, 2 of the 3 armed men were down. Catherine screamed, "Stop!" Ethan froze, though his gun was already leveled at her chest. His eyes glistened, but his hand did not shake. "Drop your weapon, Catherine, please." For a moment she hesitated. A flicker of something familiar passed through her eyes. But then she stepped back and reached for a device strapped to her wrist. Ethan fired. One single shot. It struck her left shoulder, sending her crashing to the cold concrete. Jonah rushed forward and restrained her as Ethan ran to Leo's side. The boy was still breathing. Sophia collapsed around her child, shaking with relief, tears streaming unchecked. The battle on the rooftop was over, but its consequences were only beginning to unfurl. Ethan lifted his head to the gray horizon. The wind swept across the rooftop, carrying with it the bitter weight of everything he had been forced to do to protect the people he loved, and for a truth that could never be forgiven. Blood from Catherine's wound spread slowly across the cold gray concrete, seeping into the cracks like a painful reminder that every choice extracts its price. She groaned, her eyes filled with disbelief and fury at having been shot by Ethan, the man she once called her brother. Ethan did not look at her. He knelt beside Leo, placing his hand over the child's chest as if trying to catch the rhythm of a breath already slipping toward the edge of silence. Sophia trembled as she tore at the bindings on her wrists, her tears falling onto Leo's pale face. The wind swept across them, threading through their disheveled hair, as though attempting to carry away the heavy fog of loss suspended between life and death. Jonah approached quickly, handing Ethan the signal transmitter before restraining Catherine and disabling the device on her wrist with a single coded sweep. He muttered, checking the readout. "This isn't just a data wipe. It's a remote detonator for incendiary charges inside the building, likely planted in their archive room to burn the evidence if she got caught." He looked at Ethan. "We stopped the signal just in time. Whatever she was hiding is still down there intact." Ethan said nothing. He lifted Leo into his arms. The child's body feather light, his breath so faint it almost dissolved against Ethan's chest. His steps were heavy as he carried his son off the rooftop and back toward the emergency unit, where a specialized team had already been summoned the moment Jonah triggered the internal alert. Sophia stayed close behind him, her hand wrapped around Leo's small fingers, refusing to let go. The three of them moved like soldiers retreating from a battlefield, bringing home the one most gravely wounded. Catherine, bound tightly, was dragged behind them like a betrayer stripped of all illusions. Inside the emergency bay, the machines came alive the instant the doctors took Leo from Ethan's arms. They worked with swift, practiced precision, as if they had been preparing for this moment all their lives. Ethan stood outside the glass, his stare frozen, never leaving the fragile body inside. Jonah arrived from the hallway and handed him a folder. Inside were the decrypted files extracted from Catherine's device before she could wipe it. Ethan flipped through the pages, stopping at a strange symbol repeated across every document, a circle crossed by 3 diagonal lines, the emblem of a secret order he believed had dissolved decades earlier. Brave Mind, an organization buried beneath layers of pharmaceutical companies, one that had conducted human trials in South America and Eastern Europe. Ethan exhaled through clenched teeth. Catherine was only the surface. She believed herself to be the center, but she was merely another tool. Jonah nodded, his voice low. "It looks like she was given resources, but she was not the one in charge. Someone higher is pulling the strings." Ethan looked toward the surgical room where Leo was still fighting for every heartbeat. He tightened his grip on the folder, then turned to Jonah. "I do not care who they are or where they come from. From this moment on, anyone tied to Brave Mind will pay. Blood for blood. My son's life is not a commodity for anyone's experiments." Jonah hesitated for a moment before nodding quietly. Ethan's face no longer belonged to the cold underworld king he once was, nor to the man who had run from love and responsibility. He was a father, and he was a warrior calling forth his final crusade to protect what remained. In a separate chamber, Catherine sat strapped to a metal chair, her wound bandaged, but her face drained of color. When Ethan entered, she looked up at him, her eyes no longer angry, but hollow with despair. "I never thought it would go this far." Ethan stood before her silent for several seconds, before speaking slowly, each word sharp enough to carve itself into the mind of anyone listening. "You did not think, but you acted. And my son's blood almost spilled because of you." A few tears slid down Catherine's cheeks, but Ethan had already turned away, refusing to look back. It was time to end this. Blood had been shed, and now blood would answer for blood. The first sunlight after many days of rain stretched across the hospital windows like a thin breath of warmth slipping into air still heavy with the lingering scent of antiseptic painkillers and blood. The storm had passed, yet its aftershocks clung to every breath, every weary glance of those who had endured it. Ethan sat quietly on the plastic chair beside the hospital bed, where Leo slept soundly. The boy had survived the worst. After a 7-hour surgery, the doctors reported that his small heart had pushed beyond limits they themselves had not dared to believe possible. Leo was still weak, but he no longer hovered at the brink of death with every fragile breath. Sophia rested her head near her son, her hand wrapped around his as though if she let go for even a moment, everything would disappear. Ethan watched them both, and in his eyes was a feeling unfamiliar to him, neither relief nor pure happiness, but something like awakening after a long descent into darkness, a survival that had crawled out from wounds too deep to name. Out in the hallway, Jonah sat reading reports on a small tablet. Elvin's system had been completely disabled after their breach into the highest security server the night before. Catherine, now held in an isolated room, had signed a waiver declining legal representation. She said nothing. She only stared out the window like someone who had lost faith in everyone, including herself. Ethan felt no anger anymore, only emptiness. Betrayal's price was the loss of everything, and sometimes that hurt more than death itself. He had not gone to see Catherine again. He had chosen to spare her life, not because she deserved mercy, but because Leo deserved a father who would not spill more blood. Inside the room, the steady beeping of Leo's heart monitor was the gentlest lullaby Ethan had ever heard. He placed his hand on his son's forehead, sensing the warmth seep into his skin like a promise that he would never walk away again. Ethan had wandered lost in his own darkness for years, but now every path pointed to one thing: family. Outside the hospital, the media had begun whispering about an internal investigation involving a chain of major medical centers tied to Elvin Pharmatech. Bravemind had not yet been exposed, but they now knew someone was following their trail. Ethan would not stop. He had once survived by becoming a creature hidden in shadows. Now he would use those very shadows to carve a path of light for Leo. Sophia placed her hand on his shoulder, offering a soft smile. Her eyes still red but clear. "I never thought we would ever sit here together, after everything." Ethan did not look at her, but he tightened his hand over hers. He was not a man skilled with gentle words, but Sophia understood. In that silence there was love, there was regret, there was a promise. Jonah stepped into the room and handed Ethan a small scrap of paper found in Catherine's pocket when she was detained, a hurried message scribbled in red ink. "Bravemind will not stop here. There are more children, and they are not as lucky as Leo." Ethan read the message again and again, then slipped it into his jacket. He knew the storm had only just begun. But at least now he had risen after being struck down. After a storm, the sky is not always clear, but the light always returns even in the faintest form. And Ethan, Sophia, and Leo, three fractured souls once scattered between two opposing worlds, now sat together as a family, imperfect but whole enough and exactly what they needed to keep moving forward. That afternoon, Chicago seemed to sink into an unfamiliar silence. Sunlight was smothered beneath a thick gray layer of clouds, leaving the ground washed in a muted yellowed haze, and the air cold enough to warn of another storm on its way, though this time it brewed in the hearts of those who remained. Ethan stood alone on the hospital rooftop, the same place where only a few days earlier the confrontation with Catherine had turned violent. At his feet, the old streaks of blood had long been washed away, yet in his mind every moment returned with painful clarity, as if it had just happened. He remembered the look in Catherine's eyes as she fell not only from the gunshot, but from the collapse of her own beliefs. Blood bound by family had spilled because of misguided conviction, and though he never said it aloud, the ache gnawed at him relentlessly. He once believed he no longer knew how to hurt, that a life spent in darkness had taught him how to detach from loss. But Sophia and Leo had pulled him back into his humanity, and once a heart has tasted light again, it becomes more vulnerable than ever. He tightened his grip on the scrap of paper bearing Catherine's message, the one Jonah had found in her pocket. Brave mind will not stop here. There are more children. Those words cut like a cold blade, reopening old wounds while revealing a new hell Ethan knew he could never ignore. Sophia stepped behind him, holding 2 cups of hot coffee. She handed one to him, her fingers brushing his as if anchoring him before he drifted too far into that silent abyss. She said nothing. They did not need words. Ethan looked out over the distant city. Beneath the glow of high-rise lights were laboratories, false offices, hidden basements where they carried out experiments on innocent lives. He had once been a part of a world that felt nothing, and now he understood he had to be the one to end it. Sophia's voice rose softly behind him, almost like a breath. "You will go after them, won't you?" Ethan nodded slowly. Not for revenge, for Leo, and for the children he had never met. Sophia stood silent for a long moment, then placed her hand over his chest, feeling the heavy thud of his heartbeat. "We will go with you." But Ethan knew the road ahead was not one he could allow her and Leo to walk, not because he wished to be alone, but because it was the only way to keep them safe. He touched her cheek, his gaze carrying a quiet, earnest promise that needed no words. Sophia understood instantly. She turned and walked away without asking anything more, because true love sometimes means knowing exactly when to let go, so the one you love can live as who they truly are. When night settled over the city, Ethan returned to his old headquarters, a place that had once served as the nerve center for every hidden operation he had commanded. The room was cold dust coated and silent, yet inside it lay files, weapons, and names Ethan knew were tied to Bravemind. He unfolded a world map and marked each location Jonah had sent him. Hungary. Brazil, a small clinic in Lagos, and a mobile research station in the state of Utah. Each mark represented a route of suffering places where cries never rose because they were buried beneath concrete and soundproof glass. Ethan burned Catherine's note in a metal ashtray, watching the small flame curl around the ink and turn it to dust. But the fire inside him did not fade. It flared with love stolen from him, with pain left unanswered, with the memory of Leo's fragile breath and the grief in Sophia's eyes. Blood had been spilled, but fire would consume every last one of those who believed life could be measured and manipulated like a laboratory commodity. And Ethan would be that fire. Not for the past, but for the future. It was late at night when Sophia returned to the hospital room after a brief call with the head physician. Leo was still asleep, his cheeks slightly rosier, his breathing weak but steady. The lights had been dimmed to a gentle glow, leaving only the soft illumination of the monitor, and its quiet beeping that pulsed through the room like a lullaby meant to soothe the darkness. Sophia sat beside her son and placed a hand on his forehead. The stillness was so complete that she could almost believe the chaos had finally ended, that the pain and betrayal and gunfire and blood had all been sealed behind the closed door. But then, the door eased open. A young nurse stepped inside. Small, slight, her brown hair tied neatly, her face unremarkable, except for the fact that she was the same nurse who had changed Leo's sheets that morning. Sophia nodded a greeting but kept her gaze on her son. The nurse checked the machines, wrote a few numbers on the chart, and then stood still beside the bed as if struggling with a decision. She glanced down the hallway, then leaned close to Sophia's ear and whispered rapidly, I was too scared to speak before. But now that Catherine is caught, her cleanup crew is coming. The police are distracted on the roof, but Elvin's private security is entering the lower levels disguised as maintenance. They are going to scrub the archive. You have 10 minutes. Sophia spun around, eyes wide, her heart pounding so hard her chest felt tight. She tried to speak, but the nurse was already stepping away, her eyes bright with fear layered over determination. Before slipping out the door, she left a folded piece of paper tucked beneath the monitor. Sophia picked it up and unfolded it. Inside, a shaky, handwritten message read, Old East Wing, 9th floor. The area marked under renovation. It is actually Elvin's private archive. Go now. No name. No identifying mark. Only the faint smell of fresh ink and letters that trembled as if written by a desperate hand. Sophia looked at Leo, then toward the hall. Terror slid down her spine in a cold wave. It felt like all of this was only the beginning. Ethan was downstairs where he had just finished meeting with a former security specialist who once worked for Elvin. When he received Sophia's message, he sent only 2 words: "Do not go." But Sophia knew that if there was a chance to uncover answers before they were erased forever, that moment was now. And if she did nothing by morning, those answers and the people behind them might disappear, as if they had never existed. She waited 10 minutes until the shift changed. Then, moving with a quiet swiftness born of fear and resolve, she pulled the blanket up over Leo, set a stuffed bear on his hand to disguise her absence, and slipped through the door. The hallway was empty. She crossed the administrative wing and slipped into the service elevator, pressing the button for the 9th floor. When the doors opened, a cold draft hit her face, making her shiver. This floor was officially listed as the Elvin Oak Park Research Partnership Unit, currently closed for structural repairs. Heavy plastic sheets and hazardous construction signs blocked the main view, creating a perfect blind spot. Sophia walked, her heartbeat loud in the silence. Her footsteps echoed until she reached the end of the hall, where a heavy reinforced door marked "Authorized Personnel Only." Biohazard Level 3 waited. It had been left slightly ajar in the chaos. She pushed it open. The fluorescent lights flickered to life, revealing shelves of records, drawers, and a safe left ajar. Inside were dozens of small glass vials, each filled with a colorless liquid, each labeled with the handwritten names of children. On top was a file bearing the name Leo Rourke, along with ultrasound images, genetic analyses, and a documented timeline of injection trials. Sophia felt her legs give out beneath her. She leaned against the wall, clutching her chest to quiet the sob rising in her throat. The truth lay here, raw and monstrous, worse than any nightmare she had dared imagine. And if the nurse was telling the truth, Leo was only one among dozens, perhaps hundreds of children being used as test subjects. She took out her phone, photographed everything, and sent it with a single message to Ethan: "You need to see this." As she turned to leave, a dark silhouette flickered across the frosted glass of the lab door. Someone had seen her, and time was starting to run out. Ethan reached the 9th floor only a few minutes after receiving Sophia's message. When he found her, she was pressed into a shadowed corner of the hallway, breathing hard, her face drained of color. She handed him her phone filled with photographs of chemical vials, medical files, and handwritten notes, and with only a single glance, he understood the gravity of what she had uncovered. But what made his hands clench until his knuckles turned white were the names on the list. Not just Leo. Dozens of children, most marked as missing or no longer traceable. Children who had been experimented on, who might already be dead or living somewhere in darkness, monitored, hidden, groomed for a purpose brave mind called medical progress. Ethan had never felt such fury. Not only because of Leo, but because innocent lives had been reduced to codes in a system treated as tools instead of human beings. Outside, alarms blared across the hospital. Someone had triggered a lockdown. But Ethan knew Bravemind's time had run out. Jonah had already sent the information to the press, the FBI, and a group of independent investigative journalists. What Sophia had found was the final piece needed to expose the entire network. By the next morning, every major news channel was running a special report about leaked files revealing unethical experiments on children. Elvin Pharmatech's name was plastered across every headline. A federal investigation was launched. And in the middle of the media storm, Ethan stepped back. He did not need the spotlight. He only needed Leo to live and grow without fear. In an emotional press conference, Sophia told her story. She never mentioned Ethan. She spoke of mothers who had no idea their children's blood had been taken, injected with unknown substances, of sleepless nights spent listening to cries they could not understand. And she urged every parent to trust their instincts, because sometimes one simple question could save a child's life. Leo was discharged after 2 weeks. The boy wrapped his arms around Ethan and Sophia as they stepped out of the hospital doors. In his hand, he carried his old stuffed bear, and around his neck hung a small star-shaped pendant Sophia had given him to remind him that he was always protected, always loved. But what pierced Ethan's heart most was when Leo whispered softly into his ear that he had dreamed of other children crying and asked if they could help them too. Ethan did not answer at once. He held his son tightly, tears slipping down quietly because in that simple question lay the reason he would never stop. Not just one child. Many others waiting somewhere in the dark to be saved. It was a reminder that the world still held its shadows, but also that even the faintest light could change everything. Thank you for staying with us until the end of this story. If something in today's tale touched your heart or stirred a memory from your own life, please share your thoughts in the comments below. We truly want to hear your honest feelings. Have you ever endured a deep loss or found yourself helpless as someone you loved was in danger? What would you do if you were the one forced to choose between safety and justice? Your stories are what inspire us to continue sharing powerful and meaningful narratives like this. Do not forget to like, subscribe, and share our channel so that each day you can welcome a new story to reflect on, to smile at, or simply to listen to. You are watching Heart-Woven Tales, where every story is woven from emotion and compassion. We will see you in the next video. Wishing you good health, a peaceful life, and days filled with meaning. Goodbye for now, and take care.